In the summer of 2014, Maui, Hawaii, glowed with its usual rhythm of paradise. Honeymooners strolling along golden beaches, surfers chasing waves, and tourists flocking to volcanic trails and turquoise waters. The island had long been a symbol of romance and escape, where couples began new lives under fiery sunsets and gentle Pacific breezes. For Lauren Hayes, a 31-year-old elementary school teacher from San Diego, Maui was the destination she had dreamed of since she was a teenager. To her, the island was more than just a place to relax. It was the beginning of her new life as a wife. Just a week earlier, she had exchanged vows with Eric Lawson, a 34-year-old financial advisor. Their wedding in California had been modest but elegant, filled with the warmth of friends and family who admired Lauren's radiant smile and joyful heart. Lauren was known for her optimism, her love for children, and her genuine kindness. Her colleagues often said she had a gift for patience and the ability to make anyone feel safe and heard. With Eric, she believed she had found the stability she had always longed for, a partner who seemed steady, reliable, and serious about building a future together. Eric, on the surface, was everything she wanted. Successful in his career, disciplined in his habits, and outwardly attentive. But people who knew him more closely described a different side. He was ambitious to a fault, pragmatic in ways that often felt cold, and someone who placed financial security above nearly everything else. While he could charm a room when he wanted, there was a calculating undertone behind his words and actions. The relationship had moved quickly. They met at a mutual friends fundraiser in San Diego in 2012, and within 2 years they were engaged. Lauren spoke endlessly of her love for Eric, convinced she had found her forever. To her family, Eric seemed reserved but dependable. If anything, his seriousness was seen as balanced to Lauren's light-hearted energy. What Lauren never questioned was Eric's financial mindset. Just 7 days before their wedding, Eric quietly signed a $1 million life insurance policy with Lauren as the insured and himself as the sole beneficiary. He framed it as a responsible measure, something any financial advisor would do for his family's security. Lauren, trusting and unsuspecting, never thought twice about the timing. Maui was supposed to be the stage for their honeymoon adventure. Lauren had always dreamed of scuba diving, fascinated by coral reefs and colorful fish. She saw it as a way to start her marriage with shared experiences and memories that would last forever. Eric encouraged her excitement, presenting himself as equally eager to dive into the ocean's wonders. Unlike Lauren, however, Eric had prior diving experience. She was new, full of enthusiasm but dependent on his guidance. On August 18, 2014, the couple checked into a resort near Kihei, ready for 2 weeks of beaches, hiking, and underwater exploration. Staff at the resort remembered Lauren well. She chatted warmly about wanting to see sea turtles and dolphins, her joy practically bubbling over. Eric, however, seemed more distant, polite but detached, often glued to his laptop during evenings at the hotel. Unbeknownst to Lauren, beneath his calm and collected exterior, Eric carried a chilling plan. To him, the Pacific Ocean was not just a breathtaking wonder, it was a cover. Diving accidents were tragically common, especially for inexperienced swimmers. A malfunctioning regulator, a panic underwater, or a slip in communication could end fatally, and rarely did authorities dig deeper than calling it a tragic accident. For Eric, the ocean presented the perfect opportunity. By the time he and Lauren set foot in Maui, his mind was already set. What Lauren saw as the start of a lifelong love story, Eric viewed as the final step in a carefully staged scheme. The first days of the honeymoon unfolded like the opening of a postcard. Lauren Hayes and Eric Lawson spent their mornings walking along the shoreline of Wailea Beach, where the sand was soft and the waves whispered against the coast. Tourists surrounded them, but to Lauren, it felt as though the island existed just for the two of them. She carried a camera everywhere, snapping pictures of palm trees, colorful cocktails, and Eric's half-smiles. To anyone watching, they looked like a newlywed couple lost in paradise. Lauren had waited her whole life for this kind of happiness. Her friends from San Diego had seen her through years of dating disappointments, the kind of heartbreaks that left her questioning whether true love really existed. Meeting Eric in 2012 felt like fate. He was confident, financially secure, and spoke of the future with clarity. He made her believe she was safe. During their wedding on August 11, 2014, Lauren had stood before her family in a lace gown, her voice trembling as she said her vows. She believed in them with all her heart. Eric's family and friends, however, noticed how detached he seemed, even on his wedding day. He smiled for the photographs, gave polite thanks during toasts, but there was a sense of performance in his actions. Where Lauren's eyes lit up with every detail, Eric's gaze often drifted elsewhere, toward the floor, the clock, or his phone. Still, nobody wanted to dampen the bride's joy. If Lauren was happy, they chose to believe in her vision of love. By the time they arrived in Maui on August 18th, Lauren was determined to fill every moment with adventure. She had researched the best snorkeling spots, the highest waterfalls, and the most scenic drives along the Hana Highway. But at the top of her list was scuba diving. Lauren had always dreamed of floating weightlessly among coral reefs, surrounded by schools of tropical fish. She saw scuba as more than just recreation. It was a way to conquer fear and embrace life fully. Eric supported the idea, at least outwardly. He told Lauren he had dived before, though his experience was limited to a few lessons years back. Still, compared to Lauren, he was the experienced one, and she leaned on his confidence. She signed up eagerly for beginner dives, trusting that Eric would guide her. On their third day in Maui, the couple drove to Malakini Crater, a crescent-shaped volcanic atoll popular among divers. The water was crystal clear, visibility stretching up to 150 feet. As the boat headed out from Melia Harbor, Lauren clutched Eric's arm, her excitement obvious to the instructors and fellow tourists. She asked endless questions about the gear, about the regulator, about equalizing pressure in her ears. Her eagerness was contagious, and others on the boat smiled at her enthusiasm. Eric, in contrast, was quieter. He handled the equipment with a kind of ease that made him look in control. But beneath that calm exterior, his thoughts were darker. The dive was not just another excursion to him, it was a test run. He needed to understand how closely instructors monitored beginners, how long divers stayed paired, and how easily an accident could be explained away. That evening, back at the resort in Kihei, Lauren uploaded photos of the dive to her social media, writing captions about how magical the experience was. Her friends commented with hearts and congratulations, cheering on the newlyweds. Lauren responded with warmth, never hinting at any shadow in her life. But shadows were there. Eric spent much of his time glued to his laptop, sometimes claiming he was checking in with work clients, other times browsing quietly without explanation. Lauren teased him about it, but she wasn't upset. She thought it was just part of who he was, a serious man who took responsibility seriously. Unbeknownst to Lauren, however, Eric had already been planning something far more sinister. The life insurance policy, finalized on August 4, 2014, was his safety net. On paper, it was a standard financial decision. In reality, it was the foundation of his scheme. To him, Lauren's enthusiasm for scuba diving wasn't just a honeymoon activity, it was an opportunity he had been waiting for. In the following days, Lauren insisted they schedule more dives. She wanted to see sea turtles, rays, and maybe even sharks. Each time, she looked at Eric with the kind of trust only a new wife could give, confident that he would keep her safe underwater. And each time, Eric smiled just enough to reassure her. Inside, however, he was calculating details: depth, distance from shore, and the vulnerability of someone new to the sport. To everyone else, the resort staff, the boat instructors, the waiters who brought them Mai Tais at sunset, Lauren and Eric looked like the perfect couple, enjoying their honeymoon in one of the world's most romantic destinations. No one could see the growing divide between Lauren's hope and Eric's hidden intent. By the end of their first week in Maui, Lauren was glowing with happiness, while Eric quietly rehearsed the steps of his plan. The island, with its beauty and tranquility, had no idea it was about to become the stage for a crime that would shock even seasoned investigators. On the morning of August 23, 2014, 5 days into their honeymoon, the sky over Maui was clear and the water calm. It was, by all appearances, the perfect day for diving. Lauren Hayes woke early, excited for their scheduled scuba excursion at McKenna Landing, a well-known spot frequented by both beginners and experienced divers. She carefully packed her bag with sunscreen, a towel, and her GoPro camera, eager to record the underwater beauty. Eric Lawson moved slower that morning. He double-checked their gear with a seriousness that looked like responsibility to Lauren. She thanked him with a kiss on the cheek, believing he was simply being cautious. In reality, Eric had spent the night preparing. While Lauren slept peacefully, Eric had tampered with her scuba regulator, subtly altering the airflow mechanism. To an untrained eye, the equipment looked flawless. To Lauren, a beginner, there was no reason to doubt. By 9 a.m., the couple joined a small group of tourists and an instructor by the shore. The atmosphere was lively, filled with chatter about marine life and the thrill of exploring Maui's reefs. Lauren's enthusiasm stood out. She asked the instructor about turtles and coral, her eyes wide with childlike wonder. Eric remained more reserved, listening but rarely engaging, his gaze shifting between his wife and the equipment bag he carried. The group waded into the water, adjusting masks and fins. For Lauren, the first few breaths through the regulator felt exhilarating. She turned to Eric and gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, unaware that the very device keeping her alive had been compromised. They descended slowly, the sun cutting through the water in golden shafts. Fish darted around them, flashes of blue and yellow against the reef. Lauren reached for Eric's hand, squeezing it as if to share her joy. Eric squeezed back, his eyes hidden behind his mask, his thoughts locked on the moment he had been planning for weeks. At around 20 feet below the surface, Lauren began to notice something strange. Her breaths felt more shallow, less steady than during the practice runs earlier in the week. At first she assumed it was nerves. She tried to remain calm, reminding herself of the instructor's guidance. Breathe slowly, don't panic. But the regulator resisted, giving her less air with each attempt. Lauren signaled to Eric, pointing to her regulator. Eric swam closer, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. To anyone watching, it looked like a husband reassuring his nervous wife. But Eric knew exactly what was happening. The modification he had made ensured that the airflow would falter under sustained use. The instructor, leading the group a few feet ahead, glanced back and gave a quick, okay sign. Lauren, struggling, tried to return the gesture but her movements were shaky. She tapped Eric's arm again, more urgently this time. He leaned closer, gave her a slow nod, and motioned for her to keep calm. To Lauren it was reassurance. To Eric it was delay. Within minutes, Lauren's breathing worsened. She felt her chest tighten, her lungs fighting for air that wasn't there. Panic crept in, her movements frantic now. She reached for Eric, eyes wide with fear behind her mask. In that moment, everything inside her screamed for help. Eric held her for a second longer, then released. He motioned as though signaling for her to ascend, but his guidance came too late. Lauren's body convulsed as she inhaled another insufficient breath, water seeping past the regulator. Her arms flailed, striking Eric's shoulder before her body began to sink lower. The instructor noticed the commotion and swam rapidly toward them. By the time he reached Lauren, her regulator had slipped from her mouth. He shoved it back in and tried to assist, but she was unresponsive. With the help of another diver, they pulled her upward, breaking the surface within moments. On the surface, chaos erupted. Lauren's lifeless body was dragged onto the boat. The crew began CPR immediately while calling for emergency services. Eric climbed up after them, dripping wet, his expression somewhere between shock and control. Witnesses later recalled how strangely calm he seemed, even as the crew frantically worked over his wife. Despite efforts, Lauren never regained consciousness. At 10:42 a.m., she was pronounced dead after paramedics arrived on shore. The official cause was listed initially as a scuba diving accident, likely drowning due to equipment malfunction or panic underwater. Eric sat silently on the beach as paramedics covered Lauren's body with a white sheet. He didn't cry, though his face appeared pale and stunned. When questioned by the dive instructor, he explained that Lauren had seemed anxious and inexperienced, and that panic likely overtook her. He added softly that she wanted this dive more than anything. His words painted a picture of tragedy, not suspicion. By that evening, the story spread among the resort staff and local police. Another tourist gone too soon, another life swallowed by the unpredictable ocean. The local newspaper even published a short column the next day, "San Diego newlywed dies in diving accident." To almost everyone it looked like a sad but simple case. A young bride, new to diving, lost her life on what should have been the happiest week of her life. But beneath the grief and shock, small details didn't quite fit. The instructor noted how Lauren had been unusually enthusiastic and calm during the orientation, not the type to panic easily. Another diver recalled how Eric never shouted for help or appeared desperate when his wife struggled. And though Lauren's regulator was recovered with her equipment, something about its condition would soon catch the attention of investigators. For now, though, the tragedy was seen as nothing more than a terrible accident. Eric Lawson stood quietly on the sand that night, a widower after only 12 days of marriage, outwardly broken but secretly convinced he had just secured his future. At first, the death of Lauren Hayes was treated the same way many diving fatalities in Hawaii were handled: tragic but not unusual. Maui's coastline had a reputation for beauty, but also danger. Strong currents, panic underwater, or simple equipment errors had claimed dozens of lives over the years. When the news reached the Maui Police Department on August 23, 2014, the initial report simply listed possible drowning during recreational dive. Still, standard protocol required that investigators review the circumstances. Detective Mark Tanaka, a local officer with years of experience handling accidental deaths, was assigned to the case. He visited the scene at McKenna Landing later that afternoon, speaking with the dive instructor and the surviving members of the tour group. The instructor recalled Lauren's excitement before the dive. He emphasized how comfortable she had seemed during the orientation. She wasn't panicking at first, he told Detective Tanaka. Something went wrong with her air. She tapped her husband, but by the time I got there, she was already struggling. Tanaka took careful notes. To him, it sounded like an unfortunate accident. But he also noticed something odd in the way people described Eric Lawson. Multiple witnesses mentioned how calm he seemed, even as CPR was being performed on his wife. One tourist said, "He just stood there. No yelling, no crying. Just watching." While grief showed itself differently for everyone, the lack of visible emotion was striking. Back at the station, Tanaka ordered the equipment to be collected and sent for routine testing. The regulator Lauren had used was set aside for analysis. It would take several days before technicians could review it in detail, but the item was logged as evidence. Meanwhile, Eric was interviewed the following day at the Kihei police station. He arrived neatly dressed, wearing a pressed shirt despite the circumstances. His answers were controlled, his voice steady. He explained that Lauren had been eager to dive, that he had supported her, and that panic likely set in once they were underwater. She was so excited, but sometimes excitement can turn to fear, Eric said, his tone measured. I tried to help her calm down, but it all happened so fast. She slipped away. When asked about his own behavior on the boat, Eric shrugged slightly. I was in shock, he explained. I didn't know how to react. Maybe I looked calm, but inside I was breaking apart. Tanaka noted the responses but did not press further. For now, the official stance remained: accidental drowning. The paperwork was being prepared to close the case once the equipment testing came back, unless something significant was found. But even as the file seemed headed toward closure, subtle red flags began to appear. The first came from Lauren's parents, who flew from San Diego to Maui 2 days after the incident. Grief-stricken, they met with Tanaka at the station. Through tears, Lauren's mother described her daughter as confident in the water, a strong swimmer who had always dreamed of diving. She wasn't reckless, her mother insisted. She prepared for everything. She read about the safety rules before they left. Her father added another detail. Lauren had called them the night before her death. In that call, she spoke joyfully about the dives and mentioned how Eric seemed distracted, spending hours on his computer. She joked that he was married to his laptop, her father recalled. But she sounded so happy otherwise. She never mentioned being nervous about the dives. Tanaka listened carefully. While their words didn't prove anything, they added to the picture. Lauren wasn't the type to panic easily, and she wasn't careless. The second red flag came from the insurance angle. While reviewing Lauren's personal information for the report, one officer noted that Eric was listed as the sole beneficiary of a substantial life insurance policy, a policy that had been signed less than 2 weeks before the wedding. On its own, that wasn't illegal. Many couples took out policies when starting a family, but the timing stood out. Tanaka requested the policy documents. When they arrived, he saw the date, August 4, 2014, just 7 days before the wedding. A note in the file mentioned the coverage amount, $1 million. That discovery didn't immediately prove wrongdoing, but it shifted Tanaka's perspective. Accidents happen, yes, but accidents followed by large payouts often required a closer look. The third red flag appeared once the equipment was tested. On August 29, 2014, a technician from the State Diving Safety Board reported unusual findings with Lauren's regulator. It looks like the airflow mechanism was tampered with, the technician explained. It wasn't a standard malfunction. Someone adjusted the valve in a way that restricted oxygen after prolonged use. Tanaka felt his pulse quicken. That changed everything. Equipment malfunctions happened, but deliberate tampering was different. He asked the technician if such tampering could be accidental, maybe from wear and tear or poor maintenance. The answer was clear: no. This wasn't wear. It was intentional. By then, whispers had already begun in Maui's tight-knit diving community. Instructors who had heard about the accident speculated quietly. One remarked, "She was too calm a diver for that to have been panic." Something didn't add up. On August 30th, Tanaka reopened the case as a potential suspicious death. He notified the county coroner, requesting a deeper autopsy review to look for any additional signs that Lauren's drowning was not purely accidental. Meanwhile, Eric seemed unaware of the growing scrutiny. He extended his stay at the resort, handling phone calls and arranging transport for Lauren's body back to California. He spoke politely with hotel staff, accepted condolences, and played the part of the grieving husband. But behind the scenes, he was already in contact with the insurance company, inquiring about the steps to file his claim. When news reached Lauren's parents that Eric had contacted the insurance company so quickly, they were stunned. "She's not even buried yet," her mother cried to investigators. To them, Eric's priorities revealed more about his true feelings than his calm demeanor on the boat ever could. What had begun as a tragic accident was slowly unraveling into something more sinister. The case of Lauren Hayes' death was no longer simply about the unpredictability of the sea. It was about intent, deception, and whether a husband had turned paradise into the perfect cover for murder. By early September 2014, the case had shifted from what looked like a tragic accident to something much darker. What struck Detective Mark Tanaka most was how quickly the pieces began to align once he looked past the surface. At first, everything had pointed toward an inexperienced diver caught in an unlucky situation. But the regulator testing changed the narrative. It wasn't just faulty equipment, it was manipulated. The breakthrough came on September 2nd, when the detailed forensic report on the scuba gear landed on Tanaka's desk. The report confirmed what the preliminary technician had hinted: the regulator had been intentionally modified. The airflow restriction was not a factory defect, nor could it have happened from ordinary wear. Someone had deliberately adjusted the valve so that it would provide enough air at shallow depths but begin to starve the diver of oxygen the longer the dive continued. It was in essence a death trap disguised as normal gear. Tanaka leaned back in his chair as he read the findings, the weight of it pressing on him. This was no longer just an unfortunate drowning, it was potentially premeditated murder. The question now was, who had access to the regulator and who had the motive? The answer pointed in one direction: Eric Lawson. Investigators dug deeper into Eric's background. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Eric was not just a man devoted to financial planning. He was a man drowning in quiet financial problems. His firm had been underperforming, and records showed he had accumulated a significant amount of personal debt in the years leading up to the wedding. Credit cards, business loans, even a mortgage he was behind on, all of it suggested a man under immense financial pressure. And then there was the life insurance policy. Documents confirmed that Eric had signed the $1 million policy just 7 days before the wedding. He was the sole beneficiary. For investigators, this was no coincidence. Meanwhile, Lauren's friends back in San Diego began reaching out to her parents, sharing text messages and conversations from the weeks leading up to the wedding. In those messages, Lauren had expressed unshakable excitement about the marriage but also subtle worries. In one, she mentioned that Eric sometimes seemed distant and preoccupied. In another, she joked, "If he's not looking at me, he's looking at his bank statements." None of it suggested she feared for her safety, but it showed the imbalance in their relationship. Lauren was head over heels in love, while Eric was already emotionally detached. On September 5th, Tanaka and his team brought Eric back in for questioning. This time the tone was sharper. They asked him directly about the insurance policy. Eric answered calmly, "It's standard. I'm in finance. That's what people in my field do. We plan for worst-case scenarios." Tanaka didn't reveal the regulator findings immediately. Instead, he pressed Eric about the dive itself, asking him to recount the moment Lauren struggled. Eric repeated the same story. She panicked, he tried to calm her, it all happened too fast. But when detectives compared his statement to the instructor's, subtle inconsistencies emerged. The instructor had said Lauren didn't appear panicked until her regulator began failing. Eric, however, framed her as nervous from the start. Later that week, Tanaka decided to meet Lauren's parents again, this time to share what they had discovered. When he told them about the regulator tampering, Lauren's mother broke down sobbing, while her father sat in stunned silence. "Are you saying he killed her?" he asked. Tanaka could only answer carefully, "We can't say for sure yet. But it looks less and less like an accident." The turning point came when investigators subpoenaed Eric's laptop, which he had been using constantly at the resort. Digital forensics revealed that in July and early August, Eric had conducted multiple online searches related to scuba diving accidents. Phrases like, "How often do scuba regulators fail?" and "diver drowns equipment malfunction" appeared in his history. Even more damning were searches about payout timelines for life insurance after death. The evidence was stacking up. But Eric remained outwardly calm. He attended Lauren's funeral in San Diego on September 8th, standing next to her grieving parents, holding their hands and whispering words of comfort. Photographs from the service showed him with a somber expression, head bowed in prayer. To the community, he appeared as a devastated newlywed robbed of his wife too soon. Only the investigators knew that behind the mask of grief, suspicion was growing stronger. The twist came when the insurance company contacted Maui police on September 10th. Eric had formally filed his claim for the $1 million payout, barely 2 weeks after Lauren's death. The timing was not just suspicious, it was almost brazen. To Tanaka, it was the final piece that transformed their suspicions into a full criminal investigation. Now the case was no longer just about a drowned bride. It was about whether her husband had engineered the perfect crime, using the ocean as his weapon and tragedy as his alibi. For the first time, Eric Lawson was officially listed not as a grieving widower, but as a person of interest in the suspicious death of Lauren Hayes. By mid-September 2014, the investigation into Lauren Hayes' death had transformed into a race against time. Detectives in Maui and San Diego were working together, exchanging evidence and coordinating interviews. Every piece of new information added weight to the suspicion that Eric Lawson had engineered his wife's death with cold precision. The insurance claim was the spark that lit the fuse. Filing for the $1 million payout so quickly made investigators certain that Eric's grief was more performance than reality. For Detective Mark Tanaka, it was the confirmation that their theory of motive was real. Eric stood to solve his crushing financial problems overnight by cashing in on his wife's death. Tanaka arranged a third formal interview with Eric on September 15th. This time, Eric was not invited to the station. He was subpoenaed. Sitting in the brightly lit interview room, Eric looked different. Gone was the composed widower dressed neatly in funeral black. Instead, he wore a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis, his hair slightly unkempt. Still, his demeanor remained calm. He spoke with the tone of a man who believed he could explain away any suspicion. The detective started with easy questions, circling back to the timeline of the dive. But then Tanaka slid a photograph of the regulator across the table. "Eric, can you explain why Lauren's regulator was tampered with?" Eric blinked, visibly thrown off. "Tampered? No, that's impossible. It was just bad equipment, right? The resort, they should be liable for that." Tanaka didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out the forensic report and placed it in front of Eric. The silence in the room stretched. Finally, Eric muttered, "I don't know anything about that. I wouldn't even know how to do that kind of thing." But detectives knew otherwise. Internet history from Eric's laptop revealed that he had been researching scuba equipment failures just weeks before the honeymoon. When Tanaka brought this up, Eric stiffened. "I was nervous about diving," he said quickly. Lauren was nervous too. "We wanted to know the risks." The excuses were thin, but Eric clung to them. Meanwhile, back in San Diego, Lauren's best friend Rachel Porter came forward with a chilling piece of information. She recalled a conversation from late July when Lauren had confessed something odd. Lauren told Rachel that Eric had been oddly insistent about scuba diving on their honeymoon. She herself had wanted to spend more time on the beach and sightseeing, but Eric kept pushing the idea of diving, almost obsessively. Rachel admitted she had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just a quirk of Eric's personality. But in light of Lauren's death, it sounded far more sinister. The mounting pressure forced investigators to build their case methodically. They interviewed the dive instructor again, pressing him for small details. He admitted that when Eric brought in the gear for inspection before the dive, he had seemed oddly protective of Lauren's regulator, not allowing the instructor to handle it for long. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now, it looked like Eric had ensured no one would discover the tampering. By late September, the FBI had been looped into the investigation. The interstate nature of the insurance claim and the suspicious death meant federal prosecutors were now paying attention. They urged Maui police to gather every shred of evidence possible. Eric, however, continued playing the part of the grieving widower in public. He gave a brief statement to a local newspaper saying, "Lauren was the love of my life. Losing her has left me broken. I only want justice for her." To casual readers, it painted a picture of a devastated husband. But to investigators, it was infuriating. A man under suspicion of murder still controlling the narrative. The conflict escalated further when Eric hired a high-powered defense attorney from Los Angeles. The attorney immediately filed motions to block investigators from accessing certain financial documents, arguing privacy violations. This move only made him look more guilty in the eyes of detectives. Behind closed doors, prosecutors debated whether they had enough to indict. They had the tampered regulator, the insurance motive, the suspicious search history, and testimony suggesting Eric had insisted on diving. But they lacked a direct witness or confession. Murder cases built on circumstantial evidence were difficult to win, and the defense would undoubtedly argue that the regulator malfunction was just an accident and that Eric's internet searches reflected natural curiosity. Still, Detective Tanaka pushed forward. He believed the case was strong enough. He also knew the clock was ticking. The longer Eric remained free, the harder it would be to secure justice for Lauren. The climax began building in early October 2014, when investigators received a bombshell tip. A fellow financial advisor who knew Eric claimed that, a few weeks before the wedding, Eric had made a strange comment over drinks. He joked that he was about to solve all his money problems after the honeymoon, the colleague said. "At the time, I thought he meant maybe a new business deal. But looking back, it feels darker than that." That statement gave prosecutors the confidence they needed. On October 16, 2014, Eric Lawson was officially arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife, Lauren Hayes. The charges included first-degree murder and fraudulent insurance claim. News of the arrest exploded across both Hawaii and California. Headlines read, "Honeymoon tragedy turns to murder case," and "Husband accused of plotting wife's drowning for $1 million policy." For Lauren's parents, the arrest was bittersweet. It didn't bring their daughter back, but it was the first step toward accountability. For Eric, the walls were closing in. What had begun as a carefully planned scheme to erase debt and secure wealth had unraveled into a public spectacle, with his name now synonymous with betrayal and murder. But the story was not over. The arrest was only the beginning of a long and grueling trial that would put Eric's actions under a microscope and determine whether justice for Lauren would truly be served. The trial of Eric Lawson began in March 2016 at the Second Circuit Court in Wailuku, Maui. By then, more than a year had passed since his arrest, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious locals, and grieving family members of Lauren Hayes. The case had captured national attention, not only because of its shocking betrayal but also because it revealed how fragile trust could be, even in the most intimate bond of marriage. Prosecutors presented their case with relentless precision. They laid out the timeline: Eric's crushing financial problems, his sudden decision to take out a $1 million life insurance policy just days before the wedding, and his insistence on scuba diving during the honeymoon. They displayed photographs of Lauren's regulator, pointing out where the device had been deliberately modified to restrict airflow. Expert witnesses from the Coast Guard and dive equipment manufacturers testified that the malfunction could not have occurred naturally. It had been engineered. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence was Lauren's last voicemail to her mother, sent just a day before the dive. In it, Lauren sounded cheerful but mentioned feeling a little nervous because Eric was so determined to dive even though she wasn't fully comfortable. Her mother, listening to that message in court, wept quietly as prosecutors argued that Lauren's instincts had been right all along. The defense, led by Eric's high-powered attorney, tried to paint a different picture. They argued that the dive accident was a tragic mishap. blaming the resort's equipment and suggesting that investigators were stretching coincidences into a murder theory. They reminded the jury that no one had physically seen Eric tamper with the regulator. The insurance policy, they claimed, was a routine financial decision, not a murder motive. But Eric's own behavior on the stand undermined his defense. Calm at first, he grew defensive under cross-examination, snapping when pressed about his internet search history and his odd comments to colleagues before the wedding. His lack of visible grief, combined with his calculated tone, left jurors unsettled. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 days. On April 12, 2016, the verdict was read aloud: guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Gasps filled the courtroom. Lauren's family embraced one another in tears, finally feeling a measure of justice for the daughter they had lost. Eric, stone-faced, stared ahead as though the words meant nothing. At sentencing a month later, the judge delivered a powerful statement. Marriage is a vow of love and protection. You twisted that vow into a weapon. The ocean was not an accident, it was your accomplice. For that, you will spend the rest of your life behind bars. Eric Lawson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The story of Lauren Hayes' death became both a cautionary tale and a symbol of resilience. Her parents later established the Lauren Hayes Foundation, dedicated to teaching young women about financial awareness and the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships. Her former students in San Diego planted a memorial garden outside the school where she had taught, ensuring her kindness would never be forgotten. For Maui, the case left a scar. The same waters that tourists flocked to for beauty and adventure had been used as a weapon of betrayal. Locals often said that whenever the ocean seemed unusually still, it felt like Lauren's presence lingered there, reminding people that paradise can hide darkness, and that evil can wear the mask of love. Eric Lawson remains incarcerated to this day, his name synonymous with one of Maui's darkest tragedies. What he thought would be the perfect crime unraveled because of meticulous investigators, unwavering family members, and the truth that even the most carefully staged lies eventually surface. And in the end, Lauren's story stood not just as a tragedy but as a testament that love, trust, and innocence deserve justice, even when taken by the person meant to protect them most.